Hey, everybody, I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, your Arkansas site in the Rivals Network. After a 4-0 start, the Hogs have lost their last two games, with the most recent coming in heartbreaking fashion at Ole Miss. But they're finally back in Fayetteville this week, ready to face an Auburn team that's unranked, but just outside of the top 25 receiving votes. But with that, it's time to once again go behind enemy lines for some insider perspective on this upcoming game. Bryan Matthews is the senior editor at AuburnSports.com, the Auburn site in the Rivals Network. He does a great job of covering the Tigers and was kind enough to give us some time today. Bryan, I really appreciate you joining us. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm not your enemy, Andrew, but we are both enemies of Alabama, right?
Exactly. Uh, let's kind of start off a little bit broad. How would you characterize, the Auburn season at the halfway point of 2021?
Been kind of a roller coaster. I think it's going to be that way probably the rest of the way. Got off to a nice start against some, outman teams. Played well at Penn State, but Penn State ultimately came through in the fourth quarter. Had a really big scare against Georgia State. Nearly lost that game. They had to get the backup quarterback, TJ Finley, to come off the bench to complete a fourth down pass to win that game. And then they got a big win in LSU. For those that don't know, that's the first time Auburn's won at LSU since 1999. So they broke a 22-year streak, and that really set them off into SEC play. And Georgia beat them pretty good, 34-10 at home last Saturday. But Georgia may be the best team in the country, so that's not surprising. I think Auburn, Arkansas. I look at the matchup. I think it's pretty even and should be a pretty exciting game and should be a fourth quarter game. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned it there. I mean, the Tigers ran into a buzzsaw that is Georgia last week. Arkansas experienced that a couple of weeks ago. How did Auburn come out of that game from an injury perspective, and how do you think the team's mindset is, coming off a tough game and heading into, as you said, a pretty tough game this weekend?
Well, they got kind of lucky against Georgia, no major injuries, and that's a big Georgia team that can knock guys around, right? So that's kind of surprising they came out that way. They do have a major injury that's been ongoing last 3 weeks now, and that's Owen Popo. They're one of their two permanent captains. He's a starting linebacker, an NFL guy certainly after this year probably, but he's been battling an injury that's kept him out. He's been close to playing, so I think he'll probably be back this week, but that'll be one to watch closely. Really, preseason warmups, we won't know until then for sure.
And diving into more of that personnel, you mentioned TJ Finley coming off the bench against Georgia State, but I mean everyone knows Bo Nix. He's been kind of the guy for a few years now. How has his season gone, and what does he do well, and what does he maybe still struggle with?
Well, he is a playmaker, right? When things break down, he can still make plays. And if you've seen the highlights from Auburn LSU, yeah, you've seen that before. He can be a little erratic with his accuracy at times, but the biggest thing that's really kept him from developing into, being the type of quarterback you expect for a five-star Rivals quarterback. He's had a rough offensive line for the last couple of years, as far as pass protection, and then his receiver this year already have, I think it's 22 drops in 6 games. They had 19 all of last year. I think it was 11 games. So that's been a big issue. They had 7 or 8 drops against Georgia. They don't have a number 1 receiver. I don't think they have a number 2 receiver. So that's really an area that Auburn is struggling to get consistent production from. They are using the tight ends and running backs a lot more in the passing game, and they've got some good ones there. And I would expect them to continue to try to do that at Arkansas.
And I mean the run game, looks like there's kind of a two-headed monster. Everyone knew about Tank Bigsby coming into the season, but it looks like Jarquez Hunter's having a really good year as well. What's kind of the scouting report on the Tigers' run game?
Well, Tank Bigsby is one of the best running backs in the country. He got off to a really good start, 100 yards, more than 100 yards in the first 3 games. But since then, Auburn's fallen behind. And it's forced them to throw more than they wanted to. They have not established the running game. In the last 3, they went back to it against LSU in the fourth quarter, and it worked. Jarquez Hunter had about a 40-yard run to set up that last score there, which was really big. But that's been an area that they need to get back to, because I don't think their offense functions really well if they're not a run play action type team. That's what Harsin and Mike Bobo want to do. that's how they're built, or that's how they're tried to be built. They're not necessarily that good at it on the offensive line, but you look at what Arkansas has done run defense wise the last couple of weeks. I think that's an area that Auburn's really going to try to take advantage of. We'll see if it works or not.
And last week, Arkansas marched up and down the field against an Ole Miss defense that, probably improved, but still not great. I think most people think that they're going to be facing a much tougher challenge this weekend in Auburn. What kind of unit does the Auburn have on that side of the ball?
Pretty tough front seven, especially against the run. They held Georgia, I think it was under 40 yards or around 40 yards in the first half. And then they finally got going. Georgia's got one of the best offensive lines in the country, and they ran for about 160 in the second. But Auburn's got some decent depth up front. Pass rush wise, they don't have like a superstar guy. They've got about 4 or 5 guys will rotate in there. They've got some solid pass rushers, but nobody special. And then the secondary should be better than it's playing right now. They've got a guy like Roger McCreary who's projected as a first-round draft pick at cornerback. They've got a senior safety in Smoke Monday. They've got a bunch of other experienced DBs, but I think those guys are struggling a little bit with Derek Mason switching to more zone coverages, whereas under the previous coordinator is almost always man. And they've looked bad at times. They've really blown some coverage, have given up some big plays. So we'll see. You would expect that to improve as the season goes on. And I have noticed Derek Mason using man a little bit more. I don't think that's what he wants to do, but I think he recognizes that that's what these DBs do better right now. So we'll see. But I think there will be opportunities for Arkansas to make some big plays in the passing game. They've got some really good receivers, much better than Auburn. So I think that's an area of concern from Auburn's perspective.
That kind of leads me to my next question. Like, if you were an offensive coordinator, how would you attack this Auburn defense? And are there key players that you would make sure to game plan around, and maybe some weaknesses that you would try to exploit?
Well, I think against Auburn, you can throw to set up the run. I really do, because they don't have a great pass rush. Their secondary is still pretty inconsistent because of the schemes. And, they've got a guy like Smoke Monday, who I consider a box safety. He's a really good player, but when he's back there 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage or deeper trying to cover guys, he's not as good as a football player as he is when he's, close to the scrimmage and doing those type of things, attacking the line. But so I would try to attack Auburn deep. I would take as many shots as I can get. I think your quarterback's going to have time to sit in the pocket. Not all the time. Auburn's got some guys that can get pressures and get sacks, but I think that's there for them. And it'll be interesting to see how Auburn approaches it defensively. They've been fairly soft in coverages, giving some cushions. So I think this could be an offensive type game. If Auburn can get their ground game going and Arkansas can throw early and start mixing it up, this could be, maybe not 52-51, but it could be definitely an exciting offensive game.
And one more kind of broader question for you that I was just curious about. Bryan Harsin was a little bit of an interesting hire, at least on the outside looking in. How was that received, and how is the Auburn fan base and like y'all's message board and things like that kind of receiving him so far through 6 games in his tenure?
Well, I think Auburn fans were just tired of Gus. I think they're ready to move on. I guess is a great dude, but I think they wanted a different offense and a different approach to recruiting. I think the reaction to Harsh has been pretty. I think everybody's behind him. They're excited to have anybody there. I don't think he's done anything special yet, although that LSU win, breaking that streak, was really big. And I think that gives him something to build on for this season. But I think it's a wait and see of what he can do. I think everybody down here recognizes that if you want to beat Auburn, if you want to beat Alabama or Georgia or LSU on a consistent basis, or Clemson, Ohio State, you've got to recruit at a much higher level. And that goes for everybody in the SEC. And I think everybody's waiting to see how that, comes about here under Harsin. Has not made a big splash in recruiting yet, but that's changed a little bit now with the transfer portal, right? It's not necessarily recruiting; it's talent acquisition. So we'll see how that can sort of work out, and see if maybe there's another path to, building a strong roster other than just signing, Rivals 100 and 5 stars all the time.
For sure. And to kind of circle back to this game on Saturday, Arkansas, for the first time in forever, maybe 2017, is actually the betting favorite this weekend. I think they're 3.5 favorites last I checked. You don't necessarily have to give a score prediction or anything here, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but how do you see this weekend's game playing out? And then what do you think are maybe the keys for either side coming out on top this weekend?
I do think this is going to be a good, exciting fourth quarter game. I probably will pick Auburn in our pick 'em, but I would not be surprised to go either way. And I like from the visiting perspective that it's 11 a.m. kickoff. I think the key for Auburn is just to establish a running game. They're so much better team when they can do that. It takes the pressure off Bo Nix. It takes the pressure off a really average receiving core to make plays. And then it takes the pressure off the defense, feeling like they've got to be perfect, and just wait for the offense to get going. So defensively, I think it's going to be rough because it looks like Arkansas's quarterback is really starting to come on, right? And he can do some things with his legs that I don't think Auburn's necessarily faced a lot of this season. And I think that's a really tough matchup for those guys. They've got some good, talented players in the front seven, but they don't have like a first round draft pick there. You know what I'm saying? And they've got some depth too, but you saw them wear down against Georgia. So this is going to be one of those games that's probably going to come down to the proverbial special teams play, turnover, one team making that play there in the fourth quarter. So, we'll see. I would not be surprised to go either way. I would be surprised if either team just, went out there and ran the floor on them.
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a good one, and one I'm looking forward to personally. But that's all I got for you, man. Appreciate you giving us some insight on the Tigers. And as a reminder to everyone listening, the kickoff is, as Bryan said, 11 a.m. Central. You can watch the game on CBS. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can always see these Know the Foe segments, as well as press conferences, practice clips, recruiting videos, and much, much more content like that. And as always, be sure to visit HawgBeat.com for our coverage of all things Arkansas.